Hello everyone and welcome to week 3 of our oral skills unit, and this week we're talking about chords. Chords, analysing, thinking about listening to chords and how they're used in pieces of music. This is where oral skills starts to get into more interesting areas. This was covered already in some degree at the 100 level, where we started to think about functional harmony or listening to functional harmony in music. Based largely around the diatonic scale. And that is a little bit of what we're going to be doing this week as well, to get us back into the idea of listening to chords. We'll also try to talk about some strategies of what we're going to listen to when we are listening to a piece of music, and what might be happening on the harmonic level. And this can be tricky to discern sometimes as well, especially when it depends on what instruments are being used to make these harmonic gestures. So how many layers are being used, what are the different layers, how are they being sounded, are they playing as chords, is it a chordal instrument, or is it a collection of instruments that have one line that are creating harmonic suggestions. So we're going to be looking at this and thinking about it for the next few weeks. And while this week we're going to revise our diatonic chord analysis or chord progressions in diatonic music, we will then move on to expanding this diatonic area. So we're going to step through it bit by bit, partly because this is a complicated area and there's quite a jump from analysing individual lines, thinking about individual lines of music, and transcribing melodies or single lines, because we're more used to associating things to a single pitch, so we can analyze timbre and then listen to a single pitch move around. However, analyzing chords is a slightly different skill and a different approach, and it involves listening to more than one thing at once. So we're going to then expand this diatonic area and look at some of the common chromatic chords that are used largely in Western music, both popular and in the classical canon. And then in week 5 we're going to go beyond that expanded diatonic area and look at modulation, so looking at pieces of music that move between different key areas. So there's a few different tiers to this. We're going to take it step by step, and we're going to look at some simple progressions in this particular screencast and in the learning module as well, because I want you to get used to just listening to these basic chord progressions before we move on. And this, again, is where the Aurelia software is quite useful. We're going to take it bit by bit. So we have the Aurelia program, which is very localized chord analysis. The chords are played on the piano, we listen to them and analyze them. Then we can listen to musical examples that are simple in nature, and these often come from popular music where there are fewer chord progressions and these are cyclical. And then we could expand that out into more complicated chord progressions, or more complicated in their articulation, these chord progressions in classical music or film music or other types of things, including video game music, broader instrumental repertoire, whatever that's going to be for you. And so there's a lot of things that fit into these 3 weeks, and we're going to be covering them. And I understand that a lot of people will come at this from different perspectives, in the sense that it will be easier for somebody who plays in a string quartet to analyze the harmonic movement of a string quartet, because the ear of that person will be more used to discerning the different layers and how they're being articulated or how they're operating. Meanwhile, somebody who plays in a band is going to be able to hear the harmonic movement of a band more easily, because they will be used to this, the way that those instruments articulate the harmonic progression, where it's coming from. So it'll be interesting. We'll try and get different responses. I'm interested to see or hear about how different people come at this topic, and in particular, it'll be good because there's a specific activity in the learning module as well, which will be about the articulation of chords in different circumstances. So I think that will be a worthwhile discussion to have online for. Okay, so let's go over a bit of revising. Our tonic chord, so a major or minor chord which is built on top of the tonic of a key area. So we build up from our root of the scale, our number 1, and this can be major or minor, it's the tonic chord. Then we have the predominant chord, and there are a number of different predominant chords, and these are simply a broad term for chords that come before the dominant chord. Commonly these are chords 2 and chord 4, but there are many others, including chord 6, and we'll talk about chord 6 a little bit later on in this screencast in particular, but other chords of the scale that come before chord 5. The dominant chord, which is chord 5, of course, which resolves or leads back towards chord 1. So we get this nice little cycle of harmony. Chord 7 is a subset of chord 5. Although it's not the dominant chord, we know that the notes of chord 7 are part of a 7th chord built on chord 5. So we think of chord 7 as a subset of chord 5, and it suggests the dominant area, particularly because it's built on the leading note, and so the root note of chord 7, which is the leading note, leads towards or resolves to the tonic. So, and that is part of the dominant chord area, or the function of the dominant chord. So we have these 3 areas. They are very cyclical, and we hear them articulated in a number of ways. And I know that many of you have come across these terms before and understand the relationship. So when we move around these chords, we have the tonic, which is generally stated at the beginning, but not always. There's a common thing that I'll do, which is in brackets say not always, but generally the tonic will be first thing stated. We'll move then to a predominant chord or predominant chord area. The predominant chord can be a number of chords, and this of course leads back to the dominant, and this cycles back to the tonic. So this is our canonic relationship between many of these chord areas. Now, I wanted to deviate before we look at some specific examples and just mention somebody known as Heinrich Schenker, who was a 19th and 20th century musician and musicologist. And this approach to music, which puts harmony at the center, even though, of course, harmony is not the only part of music. We have many areas, including structure, pitch, timbre, layering, whatever it's going to be. Harmony is one aspect of music, of course, and some people eschew it and ignore those rules. But it's been such a big part of Western music for so long, and this man, Schenker, developed a system of analysis, a formal system of analysis, which is now fairly well known, called Schenkerian analysis. Some of you may have come across it before. And his argument, or rather his system of argument, because there was a group of people around this man as well, argued that any piece of Western music could be reduced to a single progression from chord 1 to chord 5 back to chord 1. So again, we're listening for, in many ways, this cycle of we start out at home, we go off somewhere else, which is the dominant area, chord 5, and then we return home. And his idea is not just that this occurs in music from bar to bar, but that you could take one piece of work, a big, big piece of work, and you could say that there is chord 1 at the beginning, there is one main point where there is a big moment of chord 5, and then that leads, however long it takes, back to chord 1. And you do this by a slow system of breaking down a score bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. And this is just a simple part. Schenkerian analysis is not a focus of any part of the units that we're going to do. The reason I like to mention it into the core skills unit is partly because, for me, I think that one of the most productive uses of this is that it's partly built around this way that we experience music. It's not, while it is a harmonic and analytical procedure, the idea that frames this approach is that we hear, or when we listen to a piece of music, the experience is that we start in one place, we move in this very, very broad gesture to chord 5, and then we return in another very broad gesture back to chord 1. And basically, it's just about step by step moving through these different levels of stripping away all of the unnecessary notes until we get to, as you can see here, level 1, which has here this movement from 1 to 5 to 1. And this image is in the process. This is a work in progress in terms of the analysis, and it cuts off at the end there. So there's more to this that I could unpick, but I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to speak towards this idea that music is often, or people who value this system, and there are many, many people that value this system and still apply the ideals of Schenkerian analysis in different studies, back to this very, very broad idea of chord 1 moving to chord 5 and then moving back to chord 1 again. So certainly that harmonic version, or that narrative of music is very strong. And in some way, maybe we can hear that. I'm not sure. I'm also not a Schenkerian analyst, and I don't follow this system of analysis in my own work. But I just thought I'd mention it there. Some people can look at that if they want to. So let's have a think about some of the chords that we can listen to. At the 100 level, I think I used a song, or I have used a song in the past, which is Back to Black, Amy Winehouse song Back to Black. And there is something very useful about pop music that operates around a cycle of single chords that is a very useful teaching tool, especially for people that are not used to analyzing chords. The chords are often very clearly articulated on a few instruments, and we can hear these relationships. So, and again, we get those relationships, such as the 1-5-1, are very stark in pop music as well. So this song cycles 4 chords during the verse and the pre-chorus. The chorus is a different issue. We're going to look at the chorus next week when we start to look at the expanded diatonic area. People can have a listen to it if they like, but for the moment we're just going to think about the chorus and the pre-chorus. So the first 8 bars here are the chorus chords, and the second 8 bars are the pre-chorus chords. Oh, I shouldn't say the verse chords. So the first 8 bars are the verse chords with the chorus. The chorus comes later. First 8 bars are the verse, second 8 bars are the pre-chorus. And then we get on to the chorus. That makes more sense. And as you can see, they're the same chords, but they are in a different order as we move from the verse to the pre-chorus. And one thing I want you to pay particular attention to is the G minor chord in this example. So we're in B flat major. So being in B flat major, G minor is the chord 6. And it's the minor chord of the bunch. All the rest are major. So there's something a little bit different about that bar when we hit that bar. So as you're listening to the song, which is down below, have a listen to the relationship between these chords. So we move here from chord 1 to chord 4 to minor chord 6 to chord 5 to chord 1. And these are all diatonic, and they're comfortably diatonic as well. But as you listen, try to hear the different sound, even though they're all major chords. In the key areas, the chords will sound slightly different in relation to the respective tonic. And this is one of the reasons that sight singing, using movable do, for example, I don't have perfect pitch. Some of you may have perfect pitch, but for those of us that don't, we hear things around tonic centers. It's probably the clearest way to hear something, as opposed to simply hearing a chord and knowing that that chord sits on an E flat or whatever it's going to be. So have a listen to this. Listen to the chords. Listen to the way chord 5 leans towards chord 1. So now to deviate a little bit to some voice leading, that chord 5 to chord 1 progression is, we're hearing the perfect cadence. Perfect cadence is moving from chord 5 to chord 1, and I've taken this from the textbook by Clendenning and Marvin, and there are certain recognizable movements that we can hear. So in the bass, for example, we might hear chord 5 move up a 4th or down a 5th from the root of chord 5 to the root of chord 1. So hearing that strident move in the bass part is key to hearing this perfect cadence. Similarly, if chord 5 is in first inversion, we're going to hear the leading tone resolve up a semitone in the bass voice. So that bass voice is very important in that regard, especially since the notes of the chords can be voiced in a variety of different ways in the upper voices. So we're always generally going to be listening out, especially in the perfect cadence, to the bass movement, and we'll hear that sense of home that comes from chord one. Now to go along to another example. This song is called New Soul. Again, I'm drawing from pop music repertoire. I tend to do that because, again, I'm happy with the way that it articulates the chords and you are able to hear the chords. Some people might recognize this name. I used it in last week's. I used this musician, Yael Naim, in last week's listening list. And she wrote a song called New Soul, and this song uses a variation of the ice cream change, which is also known as the 50s change, or the doo-wop change, so a chord progression that was very common in the mid-20th century of songwriting. So all of these chords, again, are comfortably diatonic, and we're going to note that there is one minor chord. It's possible that this chord progression is exactly the same as the C01 that I just did. Let's go back and have a look. 1, 4, 6, 5, 1. It is. We have the same chord progression in these two examples, but they're in different keys and they're voiced by slightly different instruments and in different ways. And in particular, in this example, the bass part is a little bit more developed, which makes it a little bit trickier to follow the bass line, ever so slightly. So the reason we look at different ways that chords can be articulated is because we need to sort of strip away all of the extra material, the passing notes, the non-essential things, and try to listen to just the core of the chords. And the more you do this for a variety of contexts, the more confident you'll be in picking out the chords in when they're unexpected ways, or if they're voiced in unexpected ways. So again, we have a listen to this and pay particular attention to that minor chord that peaks out, and think about how it sounds in relation to those major chords again. Just a useful exercise. So what are we listening for? What are we going to, what's the takeaway points of these chord progressions? So follow the bass part, particularly in popular music when most chords will be in root position. Not always, but often they'll be in root position. So the bass part is a good friend of yours. Listen for the chord quality. Try to distinguish between the minor chords and the major chords, or the diminished chords on occasion. That can be useful. So in particular, if a chord is in a major scale or a major key area, you want to be able to listen for the minor chords, because you're going to know that they're on chord 3 or chord 6 or chord 2. So we know that those are not our main set of 1, 4, 5. So we can immediately halve the possible chord areas by hearing for whether they're minor or major chords. And then we'll have a certain knowledge about what chords logically follow other chords. So that will help you as well. These chords operate around different scale degrees, so you want to make sure that you know this, because the vice versa is the same. If we're in a minor key and we hear a major chord, we know that we're hearing a certain specific chord that sits in the major scale. So listen out for the leading tone resolving to the tonic whenever that happens, because that is a useful thing to be able to identify. If you can identify that, you're generally hearing the perfect cadence, or you're hearing some type of resolution to the tonic. So if you can identify that resolution, then you know that you're in the dominant chord area. Generally, you're hearing chord 5, or you're hearing chord 7. Because when that resolution happens, that's generally what is occurring. We're in chord 5 or chord 7, and that leading tone is resolving to the tonic. And you'll be able to hear that comfortable resolution as well. So a useful thing to be able to hear in any of the voices. And so those are all the things I wanted to talk about, just to get us back into listening to diatonic chord progressions. There are a few examples. There's a bit of textbook content to read as well, which I've put up in the learning module. And I also want to start this discussion about how you will approach this process of identifying chords, because it's more a part now of the 200 oral skills unit, and we've got 2 more weeks where we're going to build on these skills and look at some interesting harmonic devices that we might hear in a variety of different musical contexts. So I hope to learn a little bit more about your musical context this week as well, and also by way of learning about how you approach this process of chord identification. And we can use the Aurelia support to measure that as well, which is useful. So that's all for this week, and I look forward to speaking to you as usual online.